Hello, welcome to quick demonstration on a purchasing transaction definition preference called do not capture tax. So this requirement is essentially based on the need to implement a control to ensure that a tax is applied only to purchasing invoice transaction that is posted to accounts payable. And we have some assumptions in here. Firstly, is that the purchasing workflow is from a purchase order, then to item receipt, then to purchase invoice, while the purchase order is posting to the general ledger using a user-defined journal called commit. So there can be a requirement wherein commitment book is required to store information as early as purchase order, but essentially that will be canceled once you process an item receipt or purchase invoice, depending on your workflow. But the tax is only considered once the transaction is being converted into a purchase invoice transaction definition. And in this case, we are using an accrual method for processing the transaction, and we have the tax solution for Australia, GST. All right. So with the purchasing transaction definition preference, if you have a look, scroll further down, it depends on the subscriptions that you have. But under the transaction posting section, and if it's posting to the general ledger, in this case, our purchase order is posting to the general ledger, and you have an option there, do not capture tax. Right, so we are going to see later on what's the implication if it's posting to general ledger, but you don't have this ticked, especially on the tax reports. And yep, so the first example here is that the do not capture tax preference isn't checked on PO, just like this one here. So when you process a purchase order transaction and you post it, right? So if you run the BAS detailed report for that particular date that you processed the purchase order, you will see in here that the purchase order is already captured on the BAS detailed report. Right. So when the vendor invoice and eventually, if purchase order can maybe converted it into item receipt or receipting transaction and eventually to the purchase invoice. And if the purchase invoice is posting to IP, what will happen is that if you run the same report, assuming that everything happens in the same date, you will see in here both the purchase order as well as the vendor invoice or the purchase invoice are being shown on the bus detail report, which means that we are claiming the same transaction twice. So they are appearing in the bus detail report. So when you run the maybe the bus submission, if you are generating it from Sage Intacct, then you will see both transactions in there. But in reality, you would only want to show right? The one posting to the purchase invoice or referring to the purchase invoice, which is posting to your IP. But since you don't have that preference enabled, then even the purchase order is already being captured in here. So you are duplicating the same transaction and claiming the same twice, right? But let's have a look if you don't have that checked. So which means that do not capture tax on a purchasing transaction definition. So it's in the purchasing transaction definition that you have to check for purchase order, especially if it's posting to general ledger, right? As I said, posting to general ledger is all because you want to capture it on the user-defined book using a user-defined dimension, let's say on journal called commit, but you would like to reverse it anyways, right? Once you process the succeeding transactions like item receipt or purchase invoice. Okay, so you have this preference checked, which is great. This is what we want. So which means that if you process a purchase order, right, with that ticked on the transaction or ticked on the purchasing transaction definition, then when you run the bus detail report, if you look at the date of the purchase order, nothing is found, which is great because we don't want that, right? We only want that purchase order to be posted in your commitment book or an user-defined book, through the user-defined journal, but not on BAS detail. Because when you process that eventually purchase order to item receipt, maybe to purchase invoice, the purchase invoice is posting to your AP, and that's the time that you would like to record the impact on the BAS detail report and eventually to your BAS submission. Right? So when you run the BAS detail report for the same date, assuming in this case you have purchase order and purchase invoice on the same dates, and you'll only see the vendor invoice. Right, so there's no duplication in there, and you will be claiming the input tax correctly because you only have one transaction that's being captured in the BAS detail report and eventually with your BAS submission, meaning you will only record the input tax only when the purchase invoice is created, not on the purchase order at all. So, yep. So hopefully this demonstration helps, and yeah, it's a very important feature that you have to consider, especially if the purchase order is posting to the general ledger. So you would like to check that do not capture tax to ensure that the purchase order itself is just posting to your user-defined book, let's say for a commitment, but not at all on the BAS detail report, only until the AP bill or the purchase invoice related to the purchase order is being processed. So just to avoid any duplication there of claim on input tax. So hopefully this recording helps. Thank you.